So today we have clinical psychologist Dr. Hillary Goldsher with us to talk a little bit about cancel culture. Thank you, Dr. Goldsher, for taking the time to meet with us. I hope you're doing very well.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on today.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what your line of work is and what you normally do?
Yes, I am, as you said, a clinical psychologist. My work is in parenting, trauma, depression, anxiety, and also work with families dealing with various issues related to schooling, behavioral issues, etc.
Amazing. And can you just tell us a little bit of what cancel culture is? How does it work and how does it affect you or other people around you?
Yes, I mean, cancel culture is a relatively new concept and seems to be growing at a pretty rapid rate. And I was thinking about this before we began this conversation and sort of wishing that I had a really clear stance on cancel culture. It's a very complicated concept, but in terms of describing what it is in its simplest form, cancel culture is this notion that when somebody, a public figure, does something that is offensive, says something that is offensive, typically racist, misogynistic, abusive, and that is called out by the public, that the public and those affiliated with that person professionally sort of disconnect from that person, disenfranchise themselves from that person, decide not to work with them, decide not to follow them on social media, decide not to support them in personal or professional endeavors. So it's sort of a consequence for loathsome behavior.
Right. Okay. Yeah, exactly. And it goes all over social media and it has these hashtags like so and so is over party, cancel so and so. It sort of goes on and on, right?
Correct. It really becomes a very public, fast-moving phenomenon where that person, as you said, is publicly called out, and then there are hashtags that sort of spread like wildfire, and their conduct that got them in trouble in the first place becomes quite infamous, and then it's sort of a bandwagon effect where many people decide together to say, we don't accept that kind of behavior, we don't want to be aligned with that kind of perspective, we have zero tolerance for what that person is endorsing through their words or actions, and we're no longer going to be a fan of this person. We're no longer going to work with this person. So it's a pretty significant experience with a lot of momentum for the person at the center of it.
Right. You're absolutely correct. Now, does this mob mentality, for lack of a better way to put it, for cancel culture, does it hold celebrities accountable and actually change things, or is it just damaging to the people in the community?
I think that is the million-dollar question. It's so tricky and nuanced. I think the answer is a bit of both. I think it potentially can hold the person at the center of it accountable. We are in an environment in which we are looking to dismantle racial injustice and misogyny and abusive behavior. And if someone is clearly caught, so to speak, engaging in those type of behaviors or speaking in that manner, perhaps having them be dethroned from their position of status or power, etc., is an understandable, even reasonable consequence, because that behavior is so abhorrent and something as a society, as a country, we're hoping to change. The problem is, I would argue, is that in some cases it forecloses the opportunity for the person themselves at the center of it and the fan base or group of people who work with them around them to learn from the experience, to potentially change the way they think, to shift a paradigm and make an impact in that way. And so I worry for those people who make these kind of mistakes and truly, seriously want to understand why they did it in the first place, make a change after educating themselves and taking some time to really look within, that we miss an opportunity to all learn from that person.
Right. And that was actually going to be my next question. I was going to ask, do you think that something like this cancel culture phenomenon would actually make them change?
You know, this is another tricky nuance of the whole thing. You know, it's sort of a chicken or the egg. Is the canceling of their career, their impact, their status, the motivator, and then in some ways it feels disingenuous? Or is the true understanding that their actions or words don't reflect those of most people and don't reflect who they want to be inside of their heart, mind, and soul? And it really is a true and genuine intersection of being called out and a desire to change. And so we don't really know. We can't get inside of the mind of the person in a private moment whether or not their changes are genuine. But it's possible. It's certainly possible that someone has grown accustomed to thinking a certain way, has gone unchecked, has had a history of associating themselves with people who think like them, who have a generation of family members who think like them, and that when they're publicly sort of addressed with other perspectives and the hurt that their words or action cause, maybe it does create a moment in time for them where they can shift or change. We just don't know for sure, because we also know that there's a motivation around not losing their status, their work, their professional lives, their social media followers, etc. So it gets kind of tricky.
Of course, 100%. And does this form of like a threat of a job loss, or like you said, status, does that create some form of trauma for the person on the other end that this is all happening to?
It has to. It's such a good question, and part of this that we shouldn't ignore is that even though in this world of cancel culture, the person at the center of it has often made very abhorrent comments or has engaged in loathsome behavior, but certainly to be publicly shamed, to be publicly disenfranchised is going to cause trauma for the person at the center of the issue, and can cause all sorts of mental health concerns. Certainly the person will experience a great deal of embarrassment and deep shame. It's possible for the person to have clinical symptoms around depression and anxiety. Of course, we can surmise that the person would feel quite sad, quite anxious, quite nervous, and quite disaffiliated. So there's no doubt that the person at the center of it is going to have some traumatic type of experience and symptoms in the wake of this.
Oh, of course. I can only imagine. So now to hop over to the other end of that, instead of talking about the person who's being canceled, let's talk about the people who are doing the canceling. What happens when your favorite celebrity gets canceled? Like, I know a lot of people have problems, I wouldn't say problems, but an issue with canceling their favorite celebrity because they found out something that happened 10, 11 years ago, and now they're claiming that they're different. Is it normal for these people to feel like ashamed or deceived in some sort of way?
Yes, I think it makes a lot of sense for people to have a myriad of feelings to discover that someone that they've admired so much and associated themselves with in that way has views or thoughts or past actions that are totally in contrast to what the fan sort of aligns themselves with. That's a very upsetting experience, and really could create a sense of loss and even grief for kind of super fans, so to speak, who really engaged in the image and sort of career and status of someone, and then feel compelled to completely disassociate themselves. It's a loss, and it's upsetting to find out that someone you sort of trusted and felt that you knew or understood, or at the very least felt aligned with, is different, at least in some ways, than you imagined. So you're right. On the other side of it are many disappointed, confused, sad fans.
Absolutely. And for the people who still continue to support them, does it give them some feeling of isolation to the rest of and maybe their community?
I think that happens often, that people who adopt a very black and white stance on this issue, meaning someone said something offensive and they draw the line and are completely done with any type of affiliation or support from that person, often look at a person who looks at it in a more gray, nuanced way, in a way that is very difficult for the person who has a more tempered view of it, and they can certainly feel isolated. Meaning if they've decided that, yes, what they've done or what they've said is offensive to me, is upsetting, but I'm accepting the apology they've set forth, I'm sticking with this person as they're going through a struggle, that those around them may find those actions offensive or upsetting, or at the very least hard to understand. So it is difficult to be someone that has a more moderate view of a situation like this, for sort of lack of a better term.
Of course. And does this cancel culture sort of change the way that we approach the realization of our mistakes, other people's mistakes, and move on from them? Or does it almost hurt the change, like the positive change that we're trying to make in our society?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And that was what I was really thinking about before you and I got together to talk today, because I think it cuts both ways. I think that it is important to hold people accountable who engage in offensive, bigoted, racist, misogynistic behavior, and that to do so in a way that is public allows this issue to touch many people, and to really think about that many, many, many individuals in our country are standing up and saying no longer acceptable. There's a consequence for this behavior. So on one hand, that seems like it is in support of what we're trying to do in this country in terms of dismantling this kind of segregation and this racial injustice. But to the point of what we were just talking about, if we totally foreclose an opportunity for people to learn and to re-educate themselves and to engage in dialogue and to heal wounds and hurts caused by their behavior, it seems like we're missing an important component for people to learn from those kind of dialogues, to learn from that kind of discourse, to examine their own shortcomings that might match the person who's being canceled, and to perhaps shift and change along with them. So it sort of cuts both ways. I mean, it's sort of a strange answer, but I guess it depends on the offense itself, how grave it is, and how seemingly willing the person at the center of it is to really look at their behavior, make themselves an example, and to shift and change and allow themselves to be quite vulnerable in that process.
Absolutely. No, I think that is absolutely correct. Yeah, of course. How do you think that cancel culture can become something less destructive and actually hold people accountable? Like hold them accountable, I guess, in a healthier way than sort of going on social media, create this worldwide trending hashtag to cancel them.
Yes, I think it's a version of what we've been starting to talk about, that if the person at the center of it makes it very clear that they are moving into a space of self-reflection, that they are deeply troubled and sorry by their own actions, and that they are interested in learning and shifting and changing and being a vulnerable example for others, that maybe we put the pause button on the canceling and take a moment, an opportunity for people to learn from this person's mistake, to have community leaders, to have the community come forward, engage in dialogue and discourse and discussions, and for that person to be very open and authentic about what led them to express those kind of views, to engage in that kind of behavior in the first place, and to seek support and help in shifting and changing. And maybe that does trickle down to people who behind closed doors engage in that same kind of behavior, have discourse in that same offensive way, and maybe gets them to look at themselves. So I think having a slowed down process that allows for that kind of dialogue in some cases where it isn't so extreme and so hateful and so offensive and even dangerous is something that could allow these moments to be of benefit and not just kind of a swift closing of a chapter of someone's life.
Absolutely. And we really appreciate everything that you've been saying. Before we close this, I just want to ask, that everybody's basically in quarantine. The United States has sort of kind of shut down again. How would you recommend, what advice would you give people to kind of stay healthy and stay, I guess, in the best place that they could with everything going on right now?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think it is really important to actively engage in self-care and self-care that resonates with you personally. And for a lot of people, that might be hard to do because many folks' load in quarantine is larger than pre-quarantine. They're managing all of their kids who are mostly at home. They're struggling to do their jobs at home. They're struggling financially. It becomes harder to self-care, but finding even small ways to do that every day is really, really important, whether that's a 5-minute walk, whether it's a 3-minute meditation, whether it's connecting with a friend on a socially distanced walk or on a Zoom call. Just finding space to recharge is really, really important. I think second to that, or really alongside it, is staying connected, because it's pretty hard to stay connected in the traditional ways that we're used to, but finding ways to stay connected with loved ones, again, whether that's through Zoom or phone calls or distanced meetings. This by definition is a very isolating time. So making sure that you're staying connected and kind of getting nurtured and fed by the people that we love is a really, really important component to getting through such a hard time.
Absolutely. Self-care is always the best way to go. Thank you very, very much again for coming out, Dr. Goldsher. It was wonderful to speak to you on this topic. It was very interesting to hear everything that you have to say, and I really hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Pleasure to be here today.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.